that I want to give back to community. That's all politics, especially local politics, is. It's not a good time to be a Conservative. What happens at national level is completely different to how local things are.
This is the Public Sector Executive Podcast, bringing you views, insight and conversation from leaders across the public sector. Presented by Dan Ben.
And today I'm joined by Harrison Allman-Varty, who is Elmbridge Borough Councillor and is the youngest serving Conservative councillor. Why did you want to get into politics and become a councillor at this age?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on. So I am young. I spent the past year being, like you said, the youngest Conservative councillor in the UK. I think there might be one or two people that are slightly younger, but I'm certainly still, I think, by technicality, the youngest Conservative borough council, whatever. But I'm certainly going against the grain of age, I'll put it that way. To be honest, why I've got into politics, my parents aren't necessarily very political. You know, they've always ever voted for what party they saw was the least harm to how they go about their day. So they've never really looked at politics, favourably. So I've not really been brought up that way. I've always, I think my interest kind of sparked during the Brexit debate. And I think everybody was so involved in that debate and whether they liked being involved or not, everybody was. And everybody was either asked, were you in or were you out? And it was such a big thing. And that was obviously reflected in the turnout in that vote. So interest was sparked probably during Brexit, and I've kind of followed it closer and closer as it's gone along. I got elected last year at the age of 18. I'm 19 now, and the past year, it's been great. Yeah.
You mentioned there you're 19 years old, and you are going against the grain a little bit. Do you think that more people who are kind of similar age to you, maybe a little bit younger, who do have an interest in politics, should follow a similar route to you?
Yes, is the short answer. But I don't think that your selling point should be your age. For example, when I was selected, so the seat that I represent is one called Oatlands and Bowood Park in Elmbridge Borough Council, and I put myself forward and I put it out to be selected along with other candidates, and then the members in that area vote who they think would be best suited to win that election. And although I was the youngest, I didn't make it my selling point. Don't get me wrong, there were some pluses to it. For example, different exposure that I've had to maybe older candidates, and also being able to resonate a bit more with younger voters. But I didn't really put it at the forefront. I think if you are going to go in to politics as a younger person, make sure you have an offering. When it is local politics, find something that you're interested in. With the key value being that I want to give back to community. That's all. Politics, especially local politics, is what can I have to offer to the community and my electorate to make their lives easier? How can I get the better value for money from their council tax? So it's all to do with that. So I think, yes, I would definitely encourage young people, because I think the average age of a councillor is in its 60s. So I think it's always good to see every walk of life represented. I think that's always a strength. But don't make it your main selling point. Definitely have an offering.
100% agree with you. I think that's a very good point you've raised, especially about getting the value for money and stuff. So with that in mind, what do you want to achieve when you do stop being a councillor? What do you want to look back on and say, I did that?
First of all, I think communication is key. I think when you talk on the doorsteps, there is a lack of communication. People genuinely are unaware. They're much more aware of what's happening in Westminster, but much more unaware of what's happening in their local community. So, for example, in Elmbridge, the council that I sit in, which is situated in Surrey, southwest London, the local government, the administration is run by the Liberal Democrats and the Residents' Association. So they're the administration, and we, the Conservatives, are the opposition. Now, at county level, it is run by the Conservatives, and Member of Parliament level, it also is a Conservative. So there's a general kind of assumption that the council is run by the Conservatives, but it's not. So for me, I think communication is key. It's what can we take advantage of to increase communication, whether that's the use of social media, where it's more frequent door knocking, talking to residents, having more days for the community where you can interact with residents. So people are actually aware with how their money is being spent, what the next big project is, I think that would be quite a good legacy to be able to be like, well, I know that the people in my ward are much more aware. But there's also other things that I was elected on. For example, local business and local high street, it is really struggling. It's not a problem isolated to obviously Elmbridge. It's nationwide, and some areas feel it harder than others. I mean, one thing that I've always campaigned for is, for example, in Elmbridge, you have to pay to go to the car park. And I've always said I think we should introduce 30-minute free parking so we can incentivize and stimulate local high streets. That's kind of been my thing. I think the high street does struggle to compete against the online, where it's much more convenient. You can do it from your bedside. So it's like, what can the high street offer? And I've always said, for example, running days out for the community, where you're driving traffic to your local high street and you're highlighting the offering that local high street can offer that online can't. That social aspect of it, if you like. So I think that, and also I was elected on a planning basis. So I've spent the past year on something called a South Area Subcommittee. So I've been on the planning committee for kind of one up, one down planning applications. Now I sit on full planning, which is more bigger developments. So let's just say Lidl wanted to do a big development, or a hotel or anything like that. Planning, local business, communication are kind of my big three.
I'm glad you brought up planning. I did notice that you said you wanted to bring a common sense approach to planning. Why is that? And how do you think you can do that? How can councils around the country bring a common sense approach to planning?
I think Conservative councils especially are in a tricky position. They're in a tricky position because they want to protect the green belt as a fundamental thing. They want to conserve, in the name, they want to conserve those spaces. But the Conservative Party also embodies the whole entrepreneurial home ownership, buy your own home. And so the two struggle to actually go hand in hand. I think what that means is, when it comes to planning, it means there's got to be a bit of give and take. For example, a compromise would be, where can we find a site, for example, like a brownfield site that people don't mind building on? And also, I think, for example, if you look at areas like London has mass residential dwellings, so housing, like terrace housing. So if you look to other major cities, they've got a lot more concentrated housing, and by that I mean obviously tall buildings, skyscrapers, if you like. So I think that there could be more of that done. So we're getting more value out of the land. But for a common sense approach from planning around here is, I think, genuinely just looking at it and thinking, I wonder what so-and-so would think of this. And maybe even asking local residents, for example, if there's a development going up, going around to the neighbours saying, oh, have you noticed this development? What do you think of it? What would you, what would your comment be on it? I think it's kind of do as what it says in the tin, not take I think people kind of go into politics saying, oh, we need to stop development. And that's kind of the view they take. But there can be some really good development that is going on that can really elevate the community. And also, not even that, even if it's a one up, one down sign, that just makes the area look more pleasant. Some houses or some shops or whatever can damage the actual aesthetic view of the high street. And I think that's also important, making our area looking nice. So I think not to take such a view on, oh, let's just resist all development because that's what I've stood on. I don't agree with that. But I also don't agree with let's just say yes to everything that comes to us. I think it's a very balanced approach. And I think it's what can it offer? How would the average person see this? And talk, make it, like I said, going back to my key point, communication. How would residents view this? And yeah, I think that's kind of common sense, because it doesn't lean any particular way. It's looking at the pros that development can offer, because it can offer a lot of pros, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me on that. But also thinking, what could those negatives be, and why particularly might residents not like that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. There are, from my view, not as a councillor, there are big pros and cons in every situation. I grew up in the Yorkshire Dales, obviously lovely rolling countryside, but there is a shortage of houses generally. So it's all well and good saying we'll build more houses, but the people aren't going to like that if you're building houses all over their fields, and definitely the farmers were like that. And with that communication built in as well, do you think you strike a good balance with communication and balancing those pros and cons?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I spend a lot of my time on doorsteps talking to, especially after we just had local elections, which I'm proud to say the councillor that also represents here with me won. In fact, increased the vote share from last year, despite National Outlook. So I think, yeah, we're doing something right. We're staying in touch with our residents. You know, I like to call them our bosses, because they are. They decide whether we have a job or not. Yes, I think we have to. I mean, there's always something we can do better, whether that's communicating better on social media, whether it's, organising a surgery. I mean, one thing I'm currently organising at the moment, one part of the ward is called Burwood Park. It's a really nice private estate. And lately it's fallen victim to a few burglaries, and it's been going on for a bit of time now. So I'm currently organising a residents meeting along with police. So residents are able to have that direct channel, not just to myself, but directly to the police. So I think we have been doing a good job, especially with how the National Outlook. I like to see these as these elections, even though I wasn't up for election, I won't be up for election until 2026. These elections are kind of like a review of how well we're doing. So the election, obviously the ward that I represent is represented by 3 councillors, and in Elmbridge there is an election every year, so it's rotating thirds, and then it misses 1 year. So we were elected. So it was me this year, and then a lady called Hillary who was elected. This year I was elected last year, and then a lady called Ananya who will be elected the year after that, and then there's a year without an election, and it rotates. Our latest review has showed that we're doing all right so far.
It does sound like it's going very well. Do you have anything that you have your mind set on?
I think we have a hospital in kind of like walk-in centre in Weybridge, which is an area which I represent, and it was actually in the news a few years ago. It burnt down. Progress on that has been painfully slow. I think by the time that comes, people will reflect on my time, those 4 years, and also compare that against the years of development regarding that hospital. So I think that will be a staple. Anything in particular, though, I wouldn't say there's any kind of major project. I'm kind of taking most things at face value with what how they come and land on my desk as it is. So there's no kind of major project. I'm kind of just staying day to day with what residents are saying to me and how I can best suit them. So come 2026, who knows? There might be a big thing. And that might come in the year 2025, and that might make me determined to then win another full year, so I can then finish that big project, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. You are a Conservative councillor. Obviously, with everything that's going on at the minute with the party, what do you think about that situation?
It's not a good time to be a Conservative, and anybody really who tells you otherwise is lying. I would never kind of sugarcoat this. I mean, it's not. I mean, all you have to do is look in the polls to see how we're performing. We hear a lot on the doorstep about what are we doing and how we can help them. That's the main thing. But we also obviously hear, as a consequence of what's happening nationally, some anger from residents, maybe not those who are Conservative, but even some Conservatives who are like, kind of what's going on. Now, you always kind of have to remind residents that obviously what happens at national level is completely different to how local things are. I mean, we have no kind of involvement with the national government does. But I do completely understand when people come up to me and they say X, Y, Z, because I am a representative at that very point for the party, and I will, they will, if it helps, they can channel that anger at me, and I will obviously listen, and I tend not to interrupt because I think it's important that you actually absorb what they're saying, and I will, voice these things back. I will always write it down, and I will always say that to the MP, and then the MP will maybe take that further. So, the councillor is the first stage of communication, but the state of the party, I'll be honest with you. I think by the time the general election comes around, I think we'll be much better suited. I think Rishi Sunak, is really good. I think by the time the general election comes around and it comes up against Starmer, I think people will see when the campaign comes together and they're doing the debates against each other. I really think that we'll see Rishi come into his own. So I do think watch this space. Polls are very different, and local elections are very different to how people vote in general elections. They're much more likely to vote for smaller parties than in general elections. So I do think take all the polling, take the local elections with a pinch of salt. Obviously take it on board, but just know that they're not in direct correlation with how people vote in general election. I think most people would agree with that.
Thank you very much for your time, Harrison. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on today. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Happy to come back whenever you need me. If anybody wants to get in touch, feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the latest podcast from Public Sector Executive Magazine. Don't forget to like and subscribe to make sure you receive every new edition.